This is a moment in crime, a part of the vignette series presented by True Crime Man's Dark Imagination, the YouTube channel. On January 29, 1931, inside a small stone jail located in Schaefer, North Dakota, sat a young man who stood accused of one of the most heinous murders in the Midwest. Charles Bannon, 22 years old, had been incarcerated for a few days and slept peacefully the evening before, even though he would later face an arraignment for murder. Before sitting in Schaefer, authorities placed Bannon in the larger jail in Williston on January 23, 1931, a jail that was much more secure. Bannon's father, James Bannon, sat in the same jail as he stood charged with being a willing accomplice for his son's crime. In the early morning hours of that January day, a mob of approximately 70 men stormed the jail, broke in, and walked Charles Bannon to the nearby Cherry Creek Bridge near Watford City. The lynching took place in a matter of seconds as Bannon's body was thrown over the rail and his neck snapped immediately, leaving a deep purplish rope burn under his chin. No names from the lynching party have ever been confirmed. What crime is it that this young man perpetrated that was so vile to warrant a lynching, an extra legal remedy that had only been honored in the Jim Crow South? What would cause those characterized as North Dakota's men of good character to resort to such a barbaric practice? In the small village of Schaefer, North Dakota, approximately 6 miles northeast of Watford City, the community was very close, and one day in February 1930, neighbors noticed that members of the Haven family had not been seen for a few days. But their handyman, Charles Bannon, still made his presence known by staying on the seemingly abandoned farm, later joined by his father, James Bannon. The 5-member family, Albert, aged 50, Lulia, aged 39, Daniel, 18, Leland, 14, Charles, 2, and Mary, 2 months old, had not been seen since the 9th of February 1930. But it wasn't until October of that year that someone raised the alarm. The Havens were considered good farmers, and Albert was well respected in his community. Although the rest of the country struggled through the Great Depression, although the Havens were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination or the standards of the day, one can view this through photographs of the farm with its simple wooden buildings and humble surroundings. They thrived in this atmosphere, and people admired their resilience. In December of 1930, the postmaster for the area expressed concern that the Havens' mail began piling up at the post office and in their mailbox on the property. The postmaster's suspicions grew as he expressed concern at seeing that loan payments never arrived at the bank, and the life insurance policy that Albert Haven paid religiously and kept current for the last 15 years lapsed because of lack of payment. Haven family members in Minnesota stated that they had not heard from the family in months. What raised even more suspicion as to what happened to the Havens first came to light when Bannon began selling off the Havens' farm equipment. Locals thought it odd that a farmhand could abscond with the money after not receiving the permission to sell the equipment from Albert Haven. Later that month, James Bannon left the farm and headed to Oregon, saying that he was going to search for the Bannons. On December 2, 1930, Charles Bannon received a short letter from his father that only stated, "Do the right thing." The McKenzie County Sheriff, C.A. Jacobson, went out to the farm to investigate the alleged disappearances. Charles Bannon encountered Sheriff Jacobson and stated to the lawman that he was taking care of the place as the Havens moved to Oregon. In fact, Bannon told the sheriff that he brought the Havens to the train station from which they left. It was not unusual at that time for a family just to up and leave their homestead in search of better pastures, so to speak. Sheriff Jacobson walked through the house and noticed the family's warm weather coats and caps and mittens, children's toys and personal belongings. I walked through the rooms filled with the dusty, silent evidence of the former occupants. When the sheriff followed up later, he learned, through the postmaster's office, that a family by that name was not receiving mail in Oregon. Since the younger Bannon sold the equipment out from under the Havens, local authorities arrested Bannon for grand larceny on December 12, 1930. While law enforcement investigated the larceny closer, they interrogated young Bannon, and it did not take long for him to reveal the fate of the Haven family. At first, Bannon stated to police that Mrs. Haven went insane and murdered the entire family, with the exception of 2-year-old Charles. Bannon then drew Sheriff Jacobson a map where he helped Mrs. Haven bury the bodies, adding that she paid him $100 to take her to the train station. When authorities went to the Haven farm, they started digging in a large manure pile where they found some of the remains of little Charlie Haven's decomposed body. In a nearby pile of hay, law enforcement discovered the overall-clad, decomposed bodies of a man and a boy, and another body of a boy dressed in a suit and Sunday shoes. Examinations later determined the bodies found thus far were Albert, Daniel, and Leland Haven. At the bottom of the straw pile, authorities uncovered the tiny legs of Mary Haven and some of the gray hair of Lulia Haven. Some of the other remains of Lulia and more remains of Charles Haven were later discovered in what appeared to be a wolf's den, having been dragged by what appeared as someone on horseback. When law enforcement further confronted Charles Bannon, he confessed to the murder of the family, but stated that it all began when he accidentally shot Daniel Haven. According to Bannon's admissions, Daniel was shot near the barn. Then Leland was shot. Mrs. Haven then came to the gate of the barn where her 2 sons lay dead and called for them. According to Bannon, Mrs. Haven approached the barn 3 times calling for her sons. When she came through the barn door, Bannon shot her twice. Mrs. Haven sustained 1 wound in the back of the head, with the coup de grace being another shot to the back of the head. She had been shot a 3rd time when miraculously the killer learned she was still alive. Mr. Haven was shot with a revolver near the manure pile, but then Bannon smashed the older man's skull with the rifle butt. At the time of Mr. Haven's murder, the patriarch held the 2-year-old in his arms. Bannon stated he murdered the child as he ran into the living room and murdered the 2-month-old while he lay in the baby carriage. After the confessions, Sheriff Jacobson requested a warrant be issued for James Bannon as an accomplice to the murders, and he was immediately extradited from Oregon to face trial along with his son in North Dakota. In his last 2 confessions, Bannon stressed he committed the murders alone and his father did not have a hand in the slaughter. In the early morning hours of January 29, 1931, at approximately 12:30 a.m., Sheriff Sivert Thompson and Deputy Sheriff Peter Hallen heard in the distance what appeared to be an army marching toward the jail in Williston, North Dakota. Sheriff Thompson lived just a short distance away from the jail, but Deputy Hallen stood duty that night. When Deputy Hallen opened the door to the jail, he saw a large mob of men headed toward him. He slammed the door shut and locked it. When the mob reached the jail, they stormed the building and broke down the door. When demanding the keys from Deputy Hallen, he refused, and the mob overcame the lawman and took him outside of the jail. Some eyewitness accounts at the time stated that the mob appeared disciplined and well organized, going about their work as if under strict orders. One of the men in the jail that night, Fred Mackey, a man charged with theft, stated that the mob had difficulty with breaking down the door to Bannon's cell, and at that point they almost relented. But eventually they were successful and grabbed Bannon. The young man stated that he would go willingly if they let his father alone, who sat in the same jail. The mob complied and placed a noose around Bannon's neck, then put Deputy Hallen into the cell with the elder Bannon and Mackey. Dragging Bannon from the jail in the early morning air, The crowd demanded that Bannon tell the truth. The suspect swore that he told the truth, but it appeared glaringly obvious that the mob did not believe his declarations. Just then, Sheriff Thompson arrived at the jail after hastily dressing, and when he finally got there, the mob surrounded him and placed him into the same cell with Deputy Hallen, Makey, and James Bannon. At first, the mob took Charles Bannon to a nearby farm, seemingly attempting to take him to the farm where the Havens were murdered. However, a caretaker on the property forbid the crowd from executing their plans on the farm, threatening the crowd with a rifle, and so they had to move elsewhere. The mob, with Bannon in tow, then went to the Cherry Creek Bridge, a half-mile east of the jail. The bridge had recently been completed the summer before, and its most noticeable attribute was how high the bridge had been built away from the river. Without saying a word, the mob tied off the end of the rope and shoved Bannon over the side of the bridge. Some in the crowd actually stated they heard the young man's neck snap as soon as the slack tightened in the rope. The crowd then dispersed, satisfied that justice had been dispensed. A few days later, Charles Bannon was buried in Riverside Cemetery in Williston, North Dakota. Immediately after receiving news of what transpired, North Dakota Governor George Schaefer called for an investigation after calling the lynching shameful. 3 investigators, Attorney General James Morris, Adjutant General G.A. Frazier, and Gunder Osjort, head of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, were dispatched to the scene. The 3 investigators interviewed eyewitnesses and examined evidence from the lynching itself. One of the parcels of evidence, the noose, garnered special interest from A.G. Morris, as he believed the craftsmanship in the noose showed that it was the work of someone most familiar with tying those kinds of nooses. The noose also had a thread of red hemp running through it, which could have determined the manufacturer of the rope. Morris eventually concluded that the lynching appeared well organized and well led. Although these experienced investigators speculated as to the events of that morning, no arrests were forthcoming. Later historians and investigators concluded that the jail and the local police lacked competence when it came to protecting the lynched suspect. Unfortunately, and similar to most lynchings that took place over North Dakota's history, as well as the history of the rest of the nation, the real perpetrators of the extra-legal justice were never prosecuted. Hello everyone, this is Alan Gotro, your host of True Crime Man's Dark Imagination. If you would like to support our channel, you can become a member of Subscribestar. There are different levels, and subscribers get special privileges. Also, we do have a PayPal account. If you enjoy our work here, please think about subscribing. I will leave the links below in the comment section. We thank you very much for your viewing, and please stay tuned for future programs.